Hello, this is our 380T Extra Credit Review. It's for our test on Chapter 3, Rome, India, and China. Like I said, it's for extra credit. I've pushed this out to you, and it's worth 5 points, and I'm just going to go through this and share my thoughts on what these answers are. So let's just do it. Let's go through them one by one and see what I think, see if you agree. You can use this and hopefully use it to make a fantastic grade on this test, plus 5 extra points. So what language did the Romans speak? Well, of course, they spoke Latin, although Greek was widely spoken throughout the Roman Empire, particularly in the East, due to Hellenism. Describe the geography of Rome and how did this affect Rome's culture? All right, so Rome's locational situation was on the Italian peninsula, which sticks out way into the Mediterranean Sea, and this gives Rome access to trade ports all over that sea. Also, keep in mind, Rome was very close to Greece. Greece had established large, sophisticated colonies on the Italian peninsula centuries before. And so the Roman culture found a great deal of influence and inspiration from this nearby Greek culture. Next question. Identify and describe the various classes of Roman society. And there are basically 3 that you have to think about. The highest class was the patricians. They are the wealthy landowners. Only patricians could participate in the Senate, which was Rome's ruling body. Below them, you've got the plebeians. Those are your urban working class people, artisans and peasants, whose participation in the government was highly restricted, although not completely restricted. And then below them were the slaves. They were a large part of Rome's population, larger than they wanted to admit, to be honest. Describe a republic. Okay, so here it goes. Here's my attempt. The main difference between a republic and, let's say, a monarchy is that a republic has no monarch. It doesn't want a monarch. There's no place for a monarch in a republic's governmental structure. Its rule is established often by a constitution and by a legislative body, such as a Senate, or you might call it an Estates General, or a Congress, or a Parliament, or a Diet. And it's more likely to have democratically elected representatives in that legislative body. Now, that is not to say that a monarchy can't have a constitution or a legislative body or have democratically elected leaders, but historically these structures are much less powerful and much less independent in a monarchy, because in a republic they're much more powerful because there is no monarch in power for these institutions to compete with. And so describing Rome's laws, what can we say about that? Rome prided itself in being a society of established laws and making decisions about the fate of its subjects under the rule of law, rather than under the rule of despots who make decisions on the spot without any parameters, without any constraints. And the Roman law code was called the 12 Tables. And it has influenced our own legal system even today. For example, the 12 Tables proclaimed that a person charged with a crime was presumed to be innocent until he was proven guilty by the state in a court of law. And so this is a hallmark of our own judicial system. So let's identify these various Roman people. Julius Caesar, what can we say about him? He was a Roman politician. He was a military leader. He was an autocrat. He was a member of that body called the First Triumvirate. He conquered Gaul, modern-day France. He took power in Rome with an army that was loyal to him personally. He eventually got Rome's ruling body, the Senate, to make him dictator for life. He wasn't the first person to rule the Roman Republic as a dictator, but he was by far the most prominent and most influential. And he instituted reforms that really did 2 things. They stabilized Roman society and they made him more powerful. As his power increased, the power of the Senate decreased, which is what caused him to be assassinated on the Senate floor after ruling the Roman Republic as a dictator for 3 years. And that takes us to Octavian. You might think that what happened to Julius Caesar would make anybody think twice about trying to assume absolute power in the Roman Republic, but you would be wrong. Octavian was Julius Caesar's great nephew. He was a member of the Roman Republic's second triumvirate. He got into a civil war against another member of the second triumvirate, Mark Antony, and that war was over total control of the Republic. Octavian won that civil war, and this time he was made much more than just a dictator for a life. Octavian was made emperor of Rome, and he presented himself to the people as a god, and his position was now hereditary, and he changed his name accordingly. Octavian just wasn't good enough. He changed his name to Caesar Augustus. So the stories of Julius Caesar and Octavian, they have important lessons to teach us today in our time of health and social and political and environmental crisis, times of crisis, times of fear, times of anxiety and uncertainty like we're experiencing now. Whether it's economic uncertainty or social or political uncertainty, are times when people have to be most vigilant and most careful and have their eyes open with regard to preserving our rights and our way of life and our institutions. Because guys like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and Octavian, they're still around today. And they're always looking for the right time to make their move for power. And they will present themselves as the only saviors and the only deliverers from the hardships and the threats facing the nation. And they will convince people and the institutions that represent them to give them extraordinary powers that they can supposedly use to implement their solutions and fix everything and make everything better. And then before you even know what you've done, you have allowed men like this to assume a level of control, which is going to be very difficult and very costly to take back from them. So that leads us to Mark Antony. Mark Antony, member of that second triumvirate, he fought that civil war against Octavian and lost. So Spartacus, who is this Spartacus? We watched clips from the movie, didn't we? He's a captured soldier, a gladiatorial slave. He led a massive slave revolt that lasted years. It was in the time of the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire. It gave the authorities fits for a long time, and that revolt was finally crushed, and he himself was killed. And he's the quintessential slave revolt person. Jesus, who is Jesus? One of the religion that we associate with the Roman Empire more than anything else, even though it started out as a polytheistic society that worshiped many gods. That religion is Christianity. Jesus was a Judean Jew. He was a Roman subject, and he was the founder of the Christian religion, in which Jesus himself is worshipped and glorified as God and Savior. So that leads us to this Paul person. Who is Paul? We didn't really spend much time on him, but Paul was a follower and a missionary of Jesus and his message called the gospel, although they never actually physically met, at least not physically, while on earth. He was a Jewish-born Christian. Paul was a speaker and writer of Greek. He was a major contributor to the New Testament. He was a traveler. He was a citizen of Rome. And he was a major figure in the spread of Christianity throughout Rome, especially to non-Jewish converts. Diocletian, who is this Diocletian? Diocletian was a Roman emperor. He was a persecutor of Christians. He claimed divinity. In other words, he claimed to be a god. He split Rome into two administrative halves. He realized that Rome was just too big for one emperor to run by himself. And he created this short-lived system called a tetrarchy. And in this tetrarchy, Rome would be split in two administrative halves, and then each half would have two leaders, a senior leader and a junior leader. And those would be in each half of the empire, so that's a total of 4. So a tetrarchy. Constantine. Constantine was also a Roman emperor. He was the first Christian emperor. He actually converted to Christianity, and he got rid of that tetrarchy and that administrative split, and he decided he was going to try and run the entire empire himself. And he moved the capital from Rome to an eastern city called Byzantium, and then he renamed that city of Byzantium after himself, changed it to Constantinople. And then we have Theodosius. Theodosius was not only a Christian emperor, he actually made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And he actually left, when he died, he left the empire to 2 sons and split the empire back into 2 halves again, left one half to one son, one half to the other son. And so now the Roman Empire was back to being split, only this time completely and permanently split into 2 different political entities. So women, what were women allowed to do in Rome, and what were some things that women could not do? Women had many more rights in Rome than they had in Greece. In Rome, women could own their own property, and they could will that property to whoever they wanted to when they died. But there were some things women could not do. For example, they could not hold public office, they could not vote, they could not be in the Senate, they could not marry whoever they wanted to, and they couldn't go outside their husband's authority. So what civilization did the Romans especially admire and imitate? Well, that would be the Greek civilization, which we said before. For all those reasons, they admired their philosophy and their art, their literature, their history, their achievements. They thought the Greeks were the best. But we also can't forget another people that they owed a lot of influence to, and that was their immediate predecessors, the Etruscans, who occupied basically the territory that the Romans came to occupy. What were 3 reasons that Christianity spread so quickly throughout the Roman Empire? Let's change that Y to a what? What were 3 reasons? And in fact, I'm actually going to give you 4 reasons that Christianity spread so quickly throughout the Roman Empire. All right, number 1, Rome had a common language, Latin. And it also had a second common language, Greek. Greek was also widely spoken. And so you had these 2 languages that are spoken basically everywhere. You didn't have 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 different languages. That helped Christianity spread. Rome also had the Pax Romana going on at the time, which ensured that Christians could spread the gospel in relative safety. Rome also had a highly advanced infrastructure with well-engineered roads and bridges and aqueducts and large cities, large urban areas. That helped the spread of Christianity. And finally, Rome had a message of the Christian gospel that appealed to Rome's very large, lowly, and downtrodden section of population. So let's go to India. Let's give a short description of the Morga Dynasty. Not much to say here. Actually, you could say a lot, but we're just going to say this. It was large. It was Hindu. It was in India. And it was much more ancient than the Gupta Dynasty, which takes us to a short description of the Gupta Dynasty. It was also large. It was also primarily Hindu. It emerged about 500 years after the Maurya Dynasty ended, and it also was a host to Hindus' golden age. So that takes us to Hinduism. Let's describe Hinduism a little bit. Well, what are the things that we know about Hinduism? These are all the things that I'm bringing together from our content. And it was polytheistic, believed in several gods. It was very, very ancient. It was Indian. It was in India. It was the primary religion of both the Maurya and the Gupta empires. It experienced a golden age, like I said, under the Gupta dynasty. It facilitated great advances in math and astronomy, medicine, art, literature. Its main features were multiple gods, a caste system, reincarnation, karma, the idea of karma, and moksha. And we've studied all of those concepts. And it was mostly confined to the Indian subcontinent. It really didn't travel beyond those areas. In Buddhism, it's got some differences. First of all, Buddhism, it says describe Buddhism. Buddhism has no actual God. It's more of a spiritual path. And it flourished alongside Hinduism in India during both the Mauryan and Gupta dynasties. But it also spread far beyond India to the east and to the northeast, into South Asia and into China. Mauryan Empire Ashoka actually converted to Buddhism, and Buddhism is based upon the Four Noble Truths, which emphasize that suffering is the result of selfish desires. And the goal of Buddhism is to attain this state called nirvana, in which you have eliminated all your selfish desires, and therefore you've also eliminated your suffering. And you attain that by way of following the Eightfold Path. And so that's all you really need to know about Buddhism. Let's identify these famous Indian people. And we begin with Chandragupta Maurya. Let me just I'm going to put a double I right there. Okay. Chandragupta Maurya. Well, he was a Mauryan emperor, and he also converted to a religion called Jainism. So he became a Jain. Ashoka, Mauryan emperor, converted to Buddhism after the Battle of Kalinga. He spread Buddhism through his Dhamma tours, not by force, but by going on tour and spreading his ideas about Buddhism around. He also posted these large structures with these, what they called edicts on them throughout the empire. And those, one of the things that were on those edicts were a lot of Buddhist teachings. Chandragupta II. Now we're into the Gupta dynasty. And he was a Gupta dynasty emperor, and he oversaw Hindus' great cultural revival, the Golden Age. And he also promoted trade all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Faxian, he was not from India. He was actually a Chinese Buddhist monk, a traveler, a chronicler. He wrote a very influential journal about the things that he observed while traveling through the Gupta Empire. And that journal is a primary source of information about what life was like during this time, even for the Indian people. So what caused the Gupta Empire to fragment? The main cause was invasions by the White Huns. These invasions were not themselves successful, but they greatly weakened the Gupta Empire, and that emboldened local leaders to actually rebel against their imperial overlords. So what was the biggest difference between Buddhism and Hinduism? And as we've seen, there are quite a few differences, but the biggest difference of all is that Buddhism utterly rejects the caste system. China. Let's give a short description of each of these dynasties, beginning with the Zhou dynasty, and you can say Zhao dynasty if you want to. It's a written test. But the Zhou dynasty lasted about 866 years. It instituted a political and economic system that we call feudalism, which we will talk a lot about when we talk about medieval Europe. And it also began work on parts of the Great Wall, although there wasn't as much connectivity in the Great Wall as there would be later. The Zhou dynasty fragmented into the Warring States period, and the Zhou dynasty also produced philosophers such as Confucius and Lao Tzu, who came up with Taoism, the yin and the yang, balance and all that. Give a short description of the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty came out of the Warring States period on top of the other kingdoms. And the Qin dynasty was much bigger in land area than the Zhou dynasty. It instituted a administrative philosophy called legalism, which we'll talk about more. It replaced that old feudalism with a large professional bureaucracy. It also connected parts of the Great Wall and began the Grand Canal. The Qin dynasty only lasted, though, about 15 years as an imperial dynasty. Giving a short description of the Han dynasty, the Han dynasty had a long and prosperous reign. They combined the ideas of Confucianism with government. They promoted trade, especially along the Silk Road, which we will describe. They were the biggest in size yet, and they also expanded quite a bit along a large length of that Silk Road. If you see the Han Dynasty on a map, their empire, you see this large panhandle in the northwest, heading west. That's the part of the empire that goes along the Silk Road. Confucianism, let's explain it. This is the idea, in a nutshell, that a harmonious and orderly society will be achieved to the extent that people in this society will be mindful and observant of and respectful of their various roles as defined by the various human and social relationships in their lives, particularly with regard to who in the relationship holds the superior position and who in the relationship holds the inferior position. So that's Confucianism in a nutshell. So let's contrast that with an explanation of legalism. Legalism is the idea that people are basically cruel, selfish, evil, and willful and disobedient. And therefore, in order to maintain social order, the only way to do that is through swift, severe, and impartial punishment of wrongdoers. So the dynastic cycle, let's take you through that. We've talked about that numerous times. So here is one last description of it. The dynastic cycle is a cycle that follows a dynasty's development, from emergence to corruption to decline to collapse. And it's a cycle that every dynasty goes through. And every dynasty emerges to replace the one before it, restoring peace and order and prosperity. And this dynasty has the mandate of heaven behind it, meaning that the gods of heaven are now supporting this dynasty and ensuring its success. But eventually, over time, that dynasty will become corrupt. And you'll see signs of that. Taxes will go up, services will decline. And that dynasty will be then thought of as having lost its mandate of heaven. When it loses its mandate of heaven, it's going to be marked by several things. It's going to be marked by rebellions and revolts and invasions and natural disasters. And finally, that dynasty is going to collapse altogether to be replaced by a new dynasty with a new mandate from heaven, and the cycle begins all over again. And this is a thought that helps the Chinese really measure their history, because they look at the dynasties and they look at that dynastic cycle. So let's identify two people. First, Qin Emperor Shi Huangdi. He was an emperor. He was the founder of the short-lived Qin dynasty. He was a legalist. He was a harsh ruler. No wonder the Qin dynasty only lasted 15 years as an empire. Confucius, philosopher, social theorist, lived during a time of great upheaval, was very concerned about how to restore order and restore harmony in society. So what was the main idea behind this legalism as practiced by Qin Emperor Shi Huangdi? And it's like we said before, people are basically cruel and evil and selfish and willful and disobedient, and you need to rule them harshly. So let's describe the Silk Road. The Silk Road was, let's talk about what it is, and then we'll talk about what it's not. It's a network of trade routes that stretched from China through Asia overland all the way to the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. It was not an actual road. In fact, parts of it were quite hazardous and quite difficult to go along, and could even be dangerous. But not only silk traveled along that road, many different things, many different goods were transported, as well as ideas, innovations, and even diseases traveled along the Silk Road. So last question, how are the falls of the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty similar? You know, you've got these two empires on opposite ends of the Silk Road. They know about each other, but they hardly know any specifics about each other. And yet, when they both fell, they fell for many of the similar reasons. Both falls featured corruption, weak emperors, barbarian invasions. Both empires were really too large to control and to manage. And this resulted in a weakening central control. Parts of both empires fell into the hands of generals and local warlords. They both had economic problems related to an unequal distribution of wealth. When wealth is distributed unequally, like in our society, it's going to cause the resentment of the poor towards the rich. And in these two societies, peasant uprisings resulted. And so those are my thoughts on our review. I hope this helps. I hope this helps you do well on this test. Good luck, and we'll see you soon.